Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I'll never forget the feeling of dread when his profile picture popped up on my screen. The one where he's grinning way too wide, holding a ridiculously oversized fish. Before that, he was just a name on a dating app, a string of witty messages, a promise of something potentially good. Now, he was a symbol of everything that can go wrong when you put yourself out there, a walking, talking embodiment of my dating app anxieties. It all started innocently enough. I was in a dating slump. You know, the kind where every first date feels like an interview, and every potential match seems to be reciting lines from a poorly written rom-com. I needed a win, or at least a distraction. So I re-downloaded Connectify, the app all my friends swore by. It's different, they said. More about personality, less about superficial swiping. Lies, all lies, but I was vulnerable and willing to believe anything at that point. His profile was intriguing. Liam, mid-30s, self-proclaimed adventure enthusiast, and apparently a champion fisherman, judging by the aforementioned photo of him with the behemoth bass. His bio was equally eye-catching. Looking for someone to share sunsets, stargaze, and maybe, just maybe, conquer the world with. Bonus points if you can handle my questionable taste in music. Okay, cheesy, but also kind of cute. I liked that he didn't take himself too seriously. We matched almost instantly, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked about my passions, writing, hiking, pretending to be a functional adult, and I asked about his fishing, apparently, and also rock climbing, kayaking, and anything else that involved being outdoors. He had a quick wit and a self-deprecating humor that I found genuinely charming. He wasn't trying too hard, which was a refreshing change of pace. After a week of nonstop texting, we decided to meet for drinks. He suggested a quirky little bar downtown, the kind with exposed brick and live music. I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, this was the end of my dating app misery. He was even more attractive in person. Tall, with kind eyes and a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his face. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, effortlessly casual. He smelled like pine trees and something subtly masculine that made my stomach flip. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. We laughed, we debated the merits of various pizza toppings, and we even discovered a shared love for obscure indie bands. The date was a success. A real, honest-to-goodness success. He walked me back to my apartment, and we shared a hesitant, but electric, kiss goodnight. I went inside, buzzing with a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We went on hikes, explored hidden coffee shops, and spent countless nights stargazing on the roof of his apartment building. He introduced me to his friends, who were equally quirky and welcoming. I felt like I was finally fitting in, like I had found my tribe. He was attentive, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my life. He remembered the small details, like my favorite flower or the name of my childhood pet. He surprised me with handwritten notes, took me to see my favorite band, and even attempted to learn how to bake my grandmother's famous apple pie. The results were disastrous, but the effort was endearing. I was falling hard, maybe even in love. That's when things started to unravel. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little things that I initially dismissed as quirks or misunderstandings. He started getting possessive of my time, subtly discouraging me from spending time with my friends. He would call or text incessantly when I was out, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. He started making comments about my clothes, suggesting I dress more appropriately when we went out. He didn't like me wearing anything too revealing, or anything that might attract the attention of other men. He started questioning my male friends, grilling me about our history and their intentions. He seemed convinced that every guy I knew was secretly in love with me. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just insecure, I reasoned. Maybe he had been hurt in the past. But the possessiveness escalated, the jealousy intensified, and the subtle control became more and more overt. He started showing up unannounced at my apartment, just to check on me. He would scroll through my phone when I wasn't looking, scrutinizing my messages and social media activity. He started isolating me from my support system, making me feel like he was the only person I could trust. I tried to talk to him about it, to explain that his behavior was making me uncomfortable, but he would always deflect, turning the blame back on me. He would accuse me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating how much he cared about me. He would say that he was only acting this way because he loved me so much. And then there was the fish. We had planned a weekend getaway to a secluded cabin in the mountains. I was excited. We both needed a break from the city, a chance to reconnect and recharge. The cabin was beautiful, rustic and charming, with a crackling fireplace and stunning views. But the idyllic setting couldn't mask the growing tension between us. He was constantly on edge, scrutinizing my every move. He seemed convinced that I was going to leave him, that I was going to find someone else. On Saturday morning, he insisted we go fishing. I wasn't particularly fond of fishing, but I didn't want to argue. I put on my warmest clothes and followed him down to the lake. He was in his element. He cast his line with practiced ease, reeling in fish after fish. I watched him, feeling increasingly detached. The joy I had once felt in his presence was gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. He caught a particularly large fish, a monstrous bass that must have weighed at least 10 pounds. He held it up triumphantly, grinning that wide, unsettling grin. And then he turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "This is what I want," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I want to reel you in, keep you close, never let you go." The dread washed over me like a tidal wave. In that moment, I saw him for who he truly was, a controlling, possessive, and potentially dangerous man. The charming facade had crumbled, revealing the darkness beneath. I knew I had to get away. I made an excuse, saying I was cold and wanted to go back to the cabin. He didn't protest, but his eyes followed me as I walked away, like I was a prey animal trying to escape a predator. I packed my bags as quickly as I could, my hands trembling. I didn't bother leaving a note. I just wanted to disappear. I called a taxi from the cabin phone, praying that he wouldn't come back before it arrived. I waited outside, shivering in the cold, my heart pounding in my chest. The taxi finally arrived, and I jumped in, slamming the door shut. As we drove away, I looked back at the cabin, and I saw him standing on the porch, watching us. He was still holding the fish, his grin even wider than before. I haven't seen him since. I blocked him on all social media, changed my phone number, and moved to a different city. I still have nightmares about the fish, about his eyes, about the feeling of being trapped. I am slowly starting to heal. I am seeing a therapist who is helping me process the trauma. I am reconnecting with my friends and rediscovering my passions. I'm not sure if I'll ever use a dating app again. The experience has left me scarred, wary of putting myself out there. But I refuse to let it define me. I refuse to let him win. I am learning to trust my instincts, to recognize the red flags, and to prioritize my own safety and well-being. I am learning that love shouldn't feel like a trap, that it should be empowering, not suffocating. And I am learning that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows, but the ones hiding in plain sight, grinning at you with a ridiculously oversized fish. I wish I could scrub that entire year from my memory, but especially that day. The day I met Ethan. I was in my early 20s, fresh out of a bad breakup, and honestly, just craving some kind of connection, any kind. I downloaded one of those dating apps, the one that promises meaningful relationships, and not just hookups, which, looking back, was probably my first mistake. I was vulnerable, emotionally raw, and definitely not in the right headspace to be navigating the murky waters of online dating. Ethan's profile stood out. He was a photographer, or so he claimed. His pictures were moody, artistic, lots of black and white portraits with intense stares. He wrote long, rambling paragraphs about his passion for capturing the soul of his subjects. He seemed deep. At the time, I was so desperate for someone who wasn't shallow that I probably saw what I wanted to see. We matched, and he messaged me almost immediately. Our conversations were intense, bordering on obsessive, from the start. He wanted to know everything about me, my deepest fears, my biggest regrets, my hidden desires. He'd ask these probing questions late into the night, and I, eager to connect, would spill my guts. He'd respond with equally intense confessions about his own troubled past, his artistic struggles, his belief that he was somehow different from everyone else. It was intoxicating, this feeling of being seen, of being understood on such a profound level. Looking back, it was all a carefully crafted manipulation tactic. We talked for weeks before he suggested meeting in person. He wanted to take me to this secret spot he knew, a hidden overlook with a panoramic view of the city. He promised it was the perfect place to truly connect. I was hesitant. I'd never met someone from a dating app in such a secluded location before, but the intensity of our connection had lulled me into a false sense of security. I told a friend where I was going, shared Ethan's picture, and promised to check in regularly. I thought I was being careful. I wasn't careful enough. The drive to the overlook was long and winding, through increasingly deserted roads. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. I started to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Ethan, usually so talkative, was strangely silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel. When we finally arrived, the view was breathtaking. The city lights twinkled below, like a scattered handful of diamonds. For a moment, I forgot my apprehension and just drank in the beauty of the scene. But then I turned to Ethan, and the look on his face sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't looking at the city. He was looking at me, his eyes intense, almost predatory. He took a step closer, and I instinctively recoiled. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept staring, his gaze unnerving. Then he reached out and touched my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice low and husky, like a muse. I tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip. "Ethan, this is making me uncomfortable," I said, my voice shaking. He ignored me. He started talking about how he needed to capture my essence, how he needed to photograph me in this light, in this place. He pulled a camera from his bag, a professional-looking DSLR with a massive lens. "Just a few shots," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Just to capture your soul." I panicked. This wasn't the romantic connection I'd imagined. This was something else, something darker, something off. I told him I wasn't comfortable being photographed, but he wouldn't listen. He kept advancing, the camera raised, his expression growing more and more manic. I knew I had to get out of there. I pushed him away with all my strength and started running back towards the car. He yelled something after me, but I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. The image of his face burned into my mind. I made it back to the car, fumbled with the keys, and finally managed to unlock the door. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw him standing at the edge of the overlook, the camera still in his hand, his eyes filled with a rage I'd never seen before. I didn't stop driving until I reached the city limits. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove straight to my friend's house, sobbing uncontrollably. I told her everything that had happened, and she held me while I cried. The next day, I went to the police. They took my statement, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any evidence of a crime. I showed them Ethan's dating profile, but it had already been deleted. I felt helpless, violated, and terrified. I spent the next few weeks in a state of constant anxiety. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and avoided going out alone. I kept expecting Ethan to show up at my door, but he never did. Eventually, the fear subsided, but the experience left a lasting scar. I became hypervigilant, suspicious of everyone I met. I deleted all my dating apps and swore off online dating forever. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been incredibly naive, that I'd almost walked right into a dangerous situation. A few months later, I started seeing a therapist. She helped me process what had happened, to understand that I wasn't to blame for Ethan's behavior. She encouraged me to reclaim my life, to find healthy ways to connect with people. It took a long time, but I eventually started to heal. I made new friends, focused on my career, and slowly began to trust people again. But the memory of that day, of Ethan's intense stare and the desolate overlook, still haunts me. Then, a year later, I stumbled across a photography exhibition in a small, independent gallery. I was drawn in by the moody, black and white portraits, the intense stares of the subjects. As I walked through the gallery, a growing sense of dread washed over me. The photographs were eerily familiar, and then I saw it. A portrait of a woman who looked eerily similar to me, her eyes wide with fear, her mouth slightly open as if she were about to scream. The photograph was titled The Muse. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I stumbled out of the gallery, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Ethan was still out there, still preying on vulnerable women. I went back to the police, armed with exhibition information. This time, they took me seriously. They investigated Ethan, tracked him down, and discovered a disturbing pattern of behavior. He had a history of stalking and harassing women, and there was evidence to suggest he'd been involved in the disappearance of several young women over the years. Ethan was finally arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including stalking, harassment, and assault. He's currently awaiting trial, and I'm terrified of what the future holds. I wish I could forget what happened that day, the day I met Ethan. But I can't. It's a part of my story now, a dark chapter that I'll never be able to erase. All I can do is try to learn from it, to be more cautious, to trust my instincts, and to warn other women about the dangers of online dating. I still struggle with anxiety and trust issues, but I'm working on it. I'm determined not to let Ethan's actions define me, to reclaim my life and find happiness again. It's a long and difficult journey, but I'm not giving up. And sometimes, late at night, when the city lights are twinkling outside my window, I wonder about the other women, the ones who weren't so lucky, the ones who disappeared without a trace. I hope, more than anything, that they're finally at peace, and that Ethan will finally be brought to justice for what he's done. I hope one day I can finally forget. I really wish I could. Okay, so, picture this. Me, fresh out of a terrible relationship, convinced I was ready to dive back into the dating pool. My friends kept saying, "You need to put yourself out there." Easier said than done, right? I wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of swiping endlessly through dating apps, but I figured, what the heck? Might as well give it a shot. I downloaded a couple of the usual suspects, Bumble, Hinge, even Tinder for a hot minute. That was a mistake. After a few weeks of awkward conversations, and even more awkward meetups, I was starting to lose hope. Everyone seemed to either be looking for something super casual, or they were just boring. And then I matched with him. Liam. His profile was pretty standard. A couple of decent-looking photos, a bio that said he loved hiking and craft beer. Nothing that immediately screamed serial killer, which, at that point, was honestly my biggest criteria. We started chatting, and I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. He was funny, intelligent, and actually seemed interested in getting to know me. We messaged back and forth for a week or so, and then he asked me out. He suggested this little Italian restaurant downtown that I'd been wanting to try. I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, this could be something good. The night of the date, I spent way too long trying to figure out what to wear. I wanted to look nice, but not like I was trying too hard, you know? I finally settled on a black dress and some simple heels. I met him at the restaurant, and I have to admit, he was even better looking in person. He had this easy smile and these kind eyes that just made me feel comfortable. We ordered wine and appetizers, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything, our families, our jobs, our hobbies, our hopes for the future. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and I felt like I could be myself around him. It was refreshing. The date went on for hours. We closed down the restaurant, and even then, we weren't ready to say goodbye. We walked around downtown for a while, talking and laughing. He even held my hand, which, okay, maybe it was a little cheesy, but I was into it. When he finally walked me back to my car, he leaned in and kissed me. It was one of those perfect, movie-worthy kisses that made my stomach flip. We both knew it was a great start. I was on cloud 9 for the next few days. We texted constantly, made plans to see each other again. It felt like I had finally found someone who actually got me. We went on a few more dates, hiking, going to museums, even just cuddling on the couch and watching movies. Everything felt so natural and easy. I was starting to fall for him. Hard. And then things started to get weird. It started small, subtle things that I initially brushed off as coincidences. Like, he always seemed to know where I was, even when I hadn't told him. One time, I was grabbing coffee with a friend at a cafe across town, and he texted me, "Enjoy your coffee." I was like, "How did you know I was here?" He just laughed and said he had a feeling. Another time, I was complaining about a coworker, and he knew her name, even though I hadn't mentioned it. Again, he just chalked it up to coincidence. But the coincidences kept piling up, and they started to feel less and less like coincidences. He also started getting possessive. He didn't like it when I spent time with my friends without him. He wanted to know where I was and who I was with at all times. At first, I thought it was kind of sweet, like he just really cared about me. But then it started to feel suffocating. One night, I was supposed to go out with my friends, but I told him I was staying in because I was tired. He showed up at my apartment anyway, saying he wanted to surprise me with dinner. When I told him I wasn't feeling well and just wanted to be alone, he got angry. He accused me of lying to him and seeing someone else. I tried to explain that I just needed some space, but he wouldn't listen. He stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door behind him. I was shaken. This wasn't the Liam I thought I knew. The next day, he called me and apologized profusely. He said he was just afraid of losing me and that he wouldn't do it again. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to do some digging. I started by searching his name online. I found his social media profiles, which were pretty standard. But then I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There was a news article about a missing woman. The article mentioned that the woman had been dating a man named Liam, who was considered a person of interest in the case. The article didn't have a photo of Liam, but it described him as having the same physical characteristics as the man I was dating. I felt sick to my stomach. Could it be possible? Was I dating a potential killer? I knew I had to get out. I couldn't stay with him, not even for another minute. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. As I was leaving, my phone rang. It was Liam. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice cold. I can't do this anymore, Liam," I said, my voice trembling. "I know about the missing woman." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he started to laugh. A low, chilling laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can get away from me?" he said. "I know everything about you. I know where you live, where you work, who your friends are. You can't hide from me." I hung up the phone and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from him. I drove to my friend's house and told her everything. She was shocked and scared, but she let me stay with her. We called the police and reported Liam. They took my statement and said they would investigate, but I knew it wasn't enough. I couldn't just sit around and wait for something to happen. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started doing my own research, trying to find out more about Liam and the missing woman. I spent hours online, scouring news articles, social media profiles, anything I could find. Eventually, I stumbled upon something that gave me a lead. I found an old blog post written by the missing woman. In the post, she mentioned going on a hiking trip to a remote area in the mountains. I remembered that Liam had said he loved hiking. It was a long shot, but I decided to check it out. I drove to the mountains and started hiking, following the trails that the missing woman had mentioned in her blog post. After hours of searching, I finally found something. It was a small, secluded clearing, hidden deep in the woods. In the center of the clearing, there was a freshly dug grave. I knew, without a doubt, that it was her. I called the police and told them what I had found. They arrived within hours and exhumed the body. It was the missing woman. Liam was arrested shortly after. He was charged with murder and kidnapping. He pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. I thought it was over. I thought I could finally move on with my life. But the truth is, I'll never be the same. The experience changed me in ways that I can't even begin to describe. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that he'll somehow escape and come after me. I have nightmares about him, about the missing woman, about the grave in the woods. I can't trust anyone anymore. I push people away, afraid of getting hurt again. I know it's not healthy, but I can't help it. The fear is always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume me. What happened next still haunts my dreams. The memory of his eyes, his laugh, his touch, it's all burned into my mind. I try to forget, but I can't. He's always there, a constant reminder of the darkness that exists in the world. And I know, deep down, that I'll never truly be free. I live with a heavy heart and a sense of paranoia. This is my reminder that no matter how well you think you know someone, there's always a chance to miss red flags or be tricked by deceitful people. I only hope this story can save someone from suffering the same fate as the missing woman and myself. If your gut tells you something is wrong, it always is, even when you hope it is not. The damage will stay with you forever. The only thing you can do is hope it gets better with time. Dating will never be the same. It started with a dating app, not Tinder, not Bumble, something a little more obscure, targeted towards, well, intellectuals might be too strong a word, but let's say people who like to use big words and argue about philosophy at 2 a.m. I was drawn to it because, honestly, I was tired of the endless stream of gym selfies and vapid small talk that seemed to dominate the mainstream dating scene. I wanted someone who could actually hold a conversation, someone who could challenge my perspective, someone who, read books. That's how I met Julian. His profile was intriguing. A black and white photo of him staring intensely into the camera, a bio filled with quotes from Nietzsche and obscure French novelists, and a list of interests that included things like existential dread, deconstructionism, and the inherent meaninglessness of life. I know. It sounds ridiculously pretentious now, but at the time, I was completely smitten. He seemed so deep, so different, so tortured. We matched, and our conversations were instantly electric. He didn't do the usual, "Hey, how's your day?" Instead, he'd send me thought-provoking questions about the nature of reality, the illusion of free will, and the societal constructs that bind us. It was exhilarating. I felt like I was finally talking to someone who understood me, someone who saw the world the same way I did. We messaged back and forth for a couple of weeks before deciding to meet in person. He suggested a small, dimly lit bookstore cafe downtown, the kind of place where you can spend hours browsing dusty shelves and sipping overpriced coffee. It sounded perfect. The moment I saw him, I was even more captivated. He was tall and lanky, with dark, piercing eyes and a mop of unruly black hair. He was wearing a worn leather jacket and a t-shirt with a quote from Camus on it. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a French New Wave film. Our conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about books, movies, art, philosophy, everything that I loved. He was intelligent, witty, and incredibly charming. He listened intently to everything I said, making me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. He had this habit of staring intensely when he talked, like he was trying to see into my soul. It was unnerving at times, but also intoxicating. I felt like he truly saw me, understood me on a level that no one else ever had. We spent hours at the cafe that night, and when it finally closed, I didn't want the evening to end. He walked me back to my apartment, and we stood outside my door for another hour, talking and laughing. He didn't try to kiss me or make a move, which I found incredibly refreshing. It felt like he was genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just trying to get into my pants. We started seeing each other regularly after that. We'd go to art galleries, indie film screenings, poetry slams, all the kinds of places I'd always wanted to go, but never had anyone to go with. He introduced me new books, new music, new ideas. He opened up my world in a way that I never thought possible. He also started to subtly isolate me from my friends. He wasn't overtly critical of them, but he'd make little comments here and there, suggesting that they didn't understand me, that they were holding me back from reaching my full potential. He'd say things like, "They just don't get you, do they? They don't appreciate your intellect, your passion." At first, I dismissed it as harmless. I even felt a little flattered. But over time, I started to withdraw from my friends, spending more and more time with Julian. He became my whole world. He also became increasingly possessive. He started questioning me about where I was going, who I was talking to, what I was doing when I wasn't with him. He'd call or text me constantly, demanding to know my whereabouts. He insisted that we share our locations with each other on our phones, for safety. He said, if I tried to push back, he'd accuse me of not trusting him, of not being committed to the relationship. He'd say things like, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't keep secrets from me." I started to feel suffocated. I loved him, but I also felt like I was losing myself. I tried to talk to him about it, but he wouldn't listen. He'd dismiss my concerns as irrational, accusing me of being too sensitive or overreacting. One night, we were at his apartment, arguing about something. I can't even remember what it was about now. I told him that I needed some space, that I needed to spend some time alone to figure things out. He didn't take it well. He started yelling, accusing me of abandoning him, of not caring about his feelings. He grabbed my arm, his grip tightening until it hurt. "You can't leave me," he screamed. "I need you. You're the only one who understands me." I was terrified. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. I started crying, begging him to let me go. Finally, he released me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. I ran out of his apartment and didn't stop running until I got back to my place. I locked the door and collapsed on my bed, shaking and sobbing. The next day, he called me repeatedly, leaving dozens of voicemails, begging me to forgive him, promising that it would never happen again. I didn't answer. I knew I had to break up with him, but I was scared. I was scared of what he might do. He knew where I lived. He knew my friends. He knew everything about me. I confided in my friend Sarah, the one I hadn't spoken to in months, the one Julian had subtly tried to poison me against. I told her everything about his possessiveness, his manipulation, his anger. She listened patiently, without judgment. When I was finished, she said, "You need to get out of this relationship, and you need to do it safely." She helped me come up with a plan. We changed my locks, got a restraining order against Julian, and alerted my other friends and family. I started carrying pepper spray and taking self-defense classes. The police took my concern seriously, but they said their hands were tied until Julian actually did something to violate the restraining order. For a while, things were quiet. I didn't hear from Julian. I started to feel like I could finally breathe again. But then, one night, I came home from work and found a note slipped under my door. It was a quote from Nietzsche, the same one he had used in his dating profile. It read, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." I knew it was him. He was taunting me. He was letting me know that he was still watching me. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. The note wasn't a direct threat, so it didn't violate the restraining order. I was terrified again. I felt like I was living in a horror movie. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I started seeing him everywhere. In the grocery store, on the street, in the park. I knew it was him, even though he was always wearing a disguise, a hat, sunglasses, a scarf. He was stalking me. I felt like I was going crazy. I didn't know who to trust. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for something terrible to happen. Then one night, I was walking home from Sarah's apartment when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was, Julian. He was wearing a dark hoodie and a baseball cap, his face obscured by the shadows. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes burning with intensity. I froze, paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. He started walking towards me, slowly, deliberately. I knew what was going to happen. He was going to hurt me. Just as he reached me, a car pulled up beside us. It was Sarah. She had been following me, just in case. She jumped out of the car and screamed at Julian to get away from me. He hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran. Sarah drove me back to my apartment, and we called the police again. This time, they took it seriously. They launched a full-scale investigation, and within hours, they had found Julian. He had been living in a storage unit a few blocks from my apartment, filled with photos of me, clippings from my social media accounts, and a detailed plan of how he was going to save me from the shallow and meaningless world that I was living in. He was arrested and charged with stalking and violating the restraining order. He's now in prison, where he belongs. It's been a long and difficult road to recovery. I'm still dealing with the trauma of what happened, but I'm slowly starting to heal. I'm in therapy, and I'm rebuilding my relationships with my friends and family. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own safety and well-being. And I've learned that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most intelligent, the most charming, and the most intellectual. I didn't realize the danger I was in until it was almost too late. Now, I approach dating with a healthy dose of skepticism and a very strong sense of self-preservation. Okay, so dating. Ugh, even the word makes me cringe a little now. I used to be all about it, swiping, messaging, meeting up, the whole shebang. I was young, single, and honestly, pretty clueless about people. I thought everyone was basically good, just trying to find their way. I learned the hard way that some people are really good at pretending. This is the story of Mark, and it's a story about how one seemingly normal dating experience completely shattered my naivete. It all started, like so many bad decisions, on Bumble. Mark was conventionally attractive, I guess. Tall, dark hair, piercing blue eyes that looked intense in his photos. His profile was pretty generic. Liked hiking, craft beer, and indie music. Nothing that screamed stay away. We matched, chatted a bit, and decided to meet for coffee. Standard stuff. The coffee date was fine. He was a bit quiet, but I chalked it up to nerves. He asked a lot of questions about me, which I appreciated at the time. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, my job, my hobbies. I remember thinking, okay, maybe this guy is actually decent. We talked for a couple of hours, and he walked me back to my car. He didn't try to kiss me or anything, which I also appreciated. I thought it showed respect. He texted me later that night, saying he had a great time and wanted to see me again. I said yes. Our second date was a hike. Again, totally normal, right? We went to a popular trail outside of town. Lots of other people around. He was a bit more talkative this time, but still mostly focused on me. He asked about my family, my friends, my past relationships. I was pretty open, maybe too open. I told him about my struggles with anxiety, my insecurities about my career, even some embarrassing stories from high school. He listened attentively, nodding and making sympathetic noises. He seemed so understanding, so empathetic. It felt good to be able to share things with someone. We went on a few more dates over the next couple of weeks. Movies, dinner, even a concert. Everything seemed to be going well. He was always respectful, always attentive, always seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. He started calling me every night before bed, just to chat. It was all very romantic. Then things started to get weird. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He started showing up at places I hadn't told him I'd be. Once, I was having lunch with a friend at a cafe across town, and he just happened to be there, sitting at a table by himself. He said he was in the area for a meeting and decided to grab a bite to eat. It seemed plausible enough at the time. Another time, I went to a yoga class after work, and he was there, stretching in the corner. He said he had been meaning to try yoga and thought it would be fun to go together. Again, I didn't think too much of it, but then it started happening more frequently. He'd bump into me at the grocery store, at the library, even at my dry cleaner. It was like he was always just there. I started to feel uneasy, like I was being watched. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always brushed it off. He'd say things like, "It's just a coincidence," or "I just really like spending time with you." He made me feel like I was being paranoid, like I was overreacting. And honestly, part of me wanted to believe him. I really liked him, and I didn't want to think that he was doing anything creepy. Then came the night he let slip. I told him I was going to hang out with my friend Sarah, the one I went to lunch with. Sarah and I decided to check out a new bar in the city that my neighbor had recommended. I never told Mark this specific information. He just knew I was hanging out with Sarah. As we were wrapping up and ordering an Uber home, Mark texted me asking how my night was going. I told him it was great. "Great, I'm glad you and Sarah enjoyed Barname," he replied. My blood ran cold. How did he know we were at that specific bar? I asked him, point blank, how he knew where I was. He stammered for a moment, then said, "Oh, Sarah mentioned it earlier when we were texting about something else." I knew he was lying. Sarah hadn't texted him about anything, let alone our location. I called her immediately after I got home, and she confirmed that she hadn't told Mark anything about our evening. That's when I realized I was in serious danger. I ended things with him over text the next day. I know, not the bravest move, but I was genuinely scared. I told him I wasn't feeling a connection and that I didn't think we should see each other anymore. He didn't respond. For the next few days, I was on edge. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that he was watching me. I changed my routines, avoided going out alone, and made sure to lock all my doors and windows. Then, one evening, I came home from work to find my apartment door unlocked. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and silent. I flipped on the light switch, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting on my couch, waiting for me. He smiled, that same unsettling smile he had given me on our first date. "We need to talk," he said calmly. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear. He stood up and started walking towards me. I backed away, bumping into the wall. "I don't understand why you ended things," he said, his voice low and menacing. I thought we had something special. I finally found my voice. "You're scaring me," I said, my voice trembling. "Please leave." He ignored me and kept walking closer. I could smell his cologne, the same cologne he always wore on our dates. It suddenly smelled sickeningly sweet. "I just want to understand," he said, reaching out to touch my face. I flinched away. "Get away from me," I screamed. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't make this difficult," he said. I struggled against him, kicking and screaming. He was too strong. He pushed me down onto the couch and straddled me, pinning my arms above my head. "I just want you to listen to me," he said, his face inches from mine. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I thought this was it. I thought he was going to hurt me, maybe even kill me. But then, suddenly, he was gone. I opened my eyes and saw him lying on the floor, groaning. My neighbor, a burly guy named Tom, was standing over him, looking furious. I heard screaming. Tom said, "Are you okay?" I nodded, still shaking. "He broke into my apartment," I managed to say. Tom called the police, who arrived a few minutes later and arrested Mark. It turned out that Mark had a history of stalking and harassment. He had been doing this to other women for years. He had a whole system, a way of gaining their trust and then slowly isolating them from their friends and family. He was a master manipulator, a professional predator. The police found a folder on his computer filled with information about me, including my address, my phone number, my work schedule, even my family's names and addresses. He had been tracking my every move for weeks. I pressed charges, and he was eventually convicted of stalking and breaking and entering. He's in prison now, and hopefully, he'll stay there for a long time. The experience was terrifying, traumatizing. It took me a long time to recover. I went to therapy, changed my locks, and installed a security system. I still have nightmares sometimes. But more than anything, that experience taught me to always be aware of the red flags, to trust my gut, even when it's telling me something I don't want to hear, to not be afraid to ask questions, to challenge inconsistencies, and to protect myself, even if it means being rude or paranoid. I also learned to be much more careful about what I share with people, especially online. I realized how easy it is for someone to gather information about you and use it against you. Most importantly, the experience taught me that charm can be a dangerous disguise, that not everyone is who they appear to be, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most normal. Because of Mark, I will always be aware of any odd patterns of behavior and always trust my gut feeling about people. He taught me a lesson that I had to go through the worst circumstance to finally learn. I should have trusted my instincts when Mark said he was a collector. I really should have. But hindsight, as they say, is always 20/20ths. And in my case, it's also laced with a heavy dose of self-reproach and a lingering sense of violation. I met Mark on a dating app, one of those niche ones for people who are into, well, let's just say unconventional things. I won't get into the specifics of my own preferences, but Mark's profile was intriguing. He was handsome, in a brooding, mysterious way, and his bio mentioned his passion for collecting unique pieces. He left it at that, vague enough to pique my curiosity, but not so out there that it sent me running for the hills. We messaged back and forth for a couple of weeks. He was intelligent, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my work, my hobbies, my dreams, and my fears. He listened intently to my answers, offering thoughtful responses and sharing his own vulnerabilities. It was refreshing, especially compared to the usual superficial interactions I had experienced on other dating apps. He talked a lot about art, history, and forgotten treasures. He had a way of romanticizing the mundane, making even the simplest things seem extraordinary. It was intoxicating. Eventually, he suggested we meet in person. He proposed a visit to his apartment. He said he wanted to show me his collection. Again, that word hung in the air, mysterious and alluring. I hesitated. Meeting someone at their place on a first date is generally a bad idea, but something about Mark made me feel safe. Maybe it was the way he listened, the way he seemed to see me, or maybe it was just my own desperate desire for connection. Whatever it was, I agreed. His apartment was located in an older part of the city, a neighborhood filled with narrow streets and crumbling brownstones. It was a far cry from my own modern, minimalist apartment. His building was dark and imposing, with a heavy oak door and a dimly lit entryway. I buzzed his apartment, and he answered almost immediately. "Come on up," he said, his voice warm and inviting. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The apartment was even more striking than the building itself. It was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn across the windows. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something musky and unfamiliar. The walls were covered in tapestries and antique paintings, creating a sense of opulence and decay. And everywhere there were objects, statues, masks, artifacts, and curiosities of all kinds. It was like stepping into a museum, but a museum curated by someone with a decidedly unusual taste. "Welcome," Mark said, emerging from the shadows. He was even more handsome in person, his dark eyes sparkling in the dim light. He took my hand and led me further into the apartment. "This is my collection," he said, gesturing around the room with a flourish. "What do you think?" I was speechless. I didn't know what to think. It was fascinating, overwhelming, and slightly unsettling all at once. I wandered around the room, examining the various objects. There was a suit of armor, a shrunken head, a collection of antique dolls, and a taxidermied raven perched on a stand. Each object seemed to have its own story to tell, its own dark and twisted history. "It's impressive," I said, finally finding my voice. "You have quite the eye." He smiled. "I only collect the best," he said, his gaze lingering on me a little too long. He offered me a glass of wine, which I gratefully accepted. We sat on a velvet couch, surrounded by his collection, and talked for hours. He told me about his travels, his passions, and his philosophy of life. He was charismatic, intelligent, and utterly captivating. I found myself drawn to him, despite the growing sense of unease I couldn't shake. As the evening progressed, the conversation took a darker turn. He started talking about obsession, about the thrill of the hunt, and the power of possession. He spoke of the beauty of capturing something rare and unique, of preserving it for eternity. His eyes gleamed with a feverish intensity, and his voice took on a hypnotic quality. It was then that I realized that his collection wasn't just a hobby. It was an obsession, and I was starting to suspect that I was becoming his next target. He stood up and walked over to a large, ornate cabinet. He unlocked it with a small key and opened the door. Inside, there were shelves filled with jars containing something. I couldn't quite make out what they were in the dim light. "I want to show you something special," he said, his voice low and seductive. He reached into the cabinet and pulled out a jar. He turned to face me, his eyes shining with an unsettling glint. "These are specimens," he said, holding up the jar. "Each one unique, each one beautiful in its own way." I leaned closer, my curiosity overriding my fear. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I finally saw what was inside the jar. It was a butterfly, but not just any butterfly. It was a rare species, its wings iridescent and shimmering with an otherworldly glow. It was perfectly preserved, its delicate body suspended in a clear liquid. "It's stunning," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get it?" He smiled. "I found it," he said, his eyes never leaving mine, "in a very special place." He placed the jar back in the cabinet and closed the door. He turned back to me, his expression serious. "I want to show you something else," he said, taking my hand. He led me down a narrow hallway, past more rooms filled with strange and unsettling objects. We finally arrived at a door at the end of the hall. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was dark, but I could see that it was empty except for a single object in the center of the room. As he fumbled for the light switch, I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. "I actually need to go," I said in an awkward tone. "I have a headache." He ignored me, flipped the switch, and the room was flooded with light. I gasped. In the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling by chains, was a cage, and inside the cage was a woman. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with long, tangled hair and vacant eyes. She was wearing a simple white dress, and her bare feet were caked in dirt. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. I stared at her, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. But it was real. Horrifyingly real. "This is my most prized possession," Mark said, his voice filled with pride. "I found her a few months ago. She's special." I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I was frozen with fear, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. "Don't worry," Mark said, sensing my fear. "She's harmless. She doesn't bite." He reached into the cage and stroked the woman's hair. She flinched, but didn't resist. That was my chance. I turned and ran, as fast as I could, back down the hallway, past the rooms filled with unsettling objects, and out the front door. I didn't stop running until I was back on the street, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I flagged down a taxi and told the driver to take me home. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the entire night huddled in my apartment, terrified that Mark would come after me. I called the police, but they didn't believe me. They said there was nothing they could do without more evidence. I felt helpless, alone, and utterly violated. I moved out of my apartment a few days later. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and tried to disappear. I didn't want Mark to find me. I didn't want to become one of his unique pieces. I knew that I was lucky to have escaped. I knew that the woman in the cage wasn't so lucky. I still think about her sometimes. I wonder if she's still alive, if she's still trapped in that cage. I hope that someone someday will find her and rescue her. And I hope that Mark will be brought to justice for his crimes. As for me, I'm still trying to heal. I'm still trying to forget what I saw, what I experienced. But some things you can never truly forget. Some things you carry with you forever. I learned a valuable lesson that night. I learned that you can't always trust your instincts, but you should always listen to them. And I learned that some people are not what they seem. I should have trusted my instincts when Mark said he was a collector. I really should have. I'll never forget the feeling of dread when I realized I was trapped on a date with someone who seemed to be living in an alternate reality. I mean, everyone stretches the truth a little on dating apps, right? You add a few inches to your height, use a flattering filter, maybe exaggerate your hobbies. But Mark took it to a whole new level. It started innocently enough. We matched on Bumble. His profile was pretty standard. A couple of smiling photos, a bio that said he was a passionate entrepreneur and loved hiking and trying new restaurants. He seemed normal, maybe even a little boring, which was honestly a relief after some of the weirdos I'd encountered. We chatted for a few days, and he seemed articulate and engaged. He suggested we meet for dinner at this trendy farm-to-table place downtown. I checked out the restaurant online, and it looked nice, so I agreed. The first sign that things were off was when he arrived. His pictures made him look like a clean-cut, slightly preppy guy. In reality, he had this intense, almost manic energy about him. He was wearing a blazer that looked like it hadn't been ironed in years, and his hair was a bit disheveled. Still, I figured everyone has off days. I chalked it up to nerves. We sat down, and the conversation started out okay. We talked about our jobs, our families, the usual getting-to-know-you stuff. He told me he was in the tech industry, which I took to mean he worked for some kind of startup. But then he started getting into specifics, and that's when things started to unravel. He claimed he was the CEO of a company that was developing revolutionary AI technology that would change the world. He couldn't go into too much detail, he said, because it was top secret. But he hinted at things like quantum computing and neural networks. I work in marketing, so I know a little bit about tech, and some of what he was saying just didn't make sense. It was like he was throwing around buzzwords he'd heard in a movie without actually understanding what they meant. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but he kept bringing it back to his company. He started talking about his team of brilliant engineers and the millions of dollars he was raising in funding. It all sounded incredibly far-fetched, but he was so earnest and convinced that I almost started to believe him. Almost. Then the stories started getting even wilder. He told me about a time he met Elon Musk at a conference and how they totally vibed and discussed the future of humanity. He claimed he was working on a project with NASA to develop a new type of spacecraft. He even said he had invented a device that could translate animal languages. At this point, I was pretty sure he was delusional. I mean, I am open-minded, but there's a limit to what I can swallow. I started looking for an escape route. I considered faking a phone call or claiming I had a sudden emergency. But I was trapped. He had this intense, unwavering gaze that made me feel like I couldn't just get up and leave without causing a scene. The dinner arrived, and I was hoping the food would provide a welcome distraction. But no, Mark saw it as another opportunity to show off. He started lecturing me about the sustainable farming practices of the restaurant and the ethical sourcing of the ingredients. He claimed he knew the owner personally and that they were revolutionizing the food industry. I just wanted to eat my salad in peace. But he kept talking, his voice getting louder and more animated. I tried to interject a few times, to ask him questions about his life outside of his company. But he would just brush me off and go back to talking about his world-changing inventions. It was like he wasn't even aware that I was there. He was just using me as an audience for his grandiose fantasies. As the evening wore on, his stories became increasingly bizarre. He claimed he had been abducted by aliens, that he was a descendant of royalty, that he had discovered the secret to immortality. I was starting to feel genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't know if he was just a pathological liar or if he was suffering from some kind of mental illness. Either way, I wanted out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dinner ended. I quickly paid my share of the bill, desperate to escape. But Mark wasn't done yet. He insisted on walking me to my car. As we walked, he started talking about how he knew we were meant to be together. He said he could see my potential, and that he wanted me to be a part of his vision. He said we could change the world together. I just nodded and smiled nervously, trying to keep my distance. When we reached my car, he leaned in for a kiss. I recoiled, saying I wasn't ready for that. He looked hurt, but he didn't push it. He just gave me his card and told me to call him when I was ready to embrace my destiny. I practically jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped away. I didn't breathe a sigh of relief until I was safely back in my apartment. I immediately blocked his number and deleted his contact from my phone. I also decided to take a break from online dating for a while. The next day, I did some Googling. I wanted to see if I could find any information about Mark's company. I searched for his name, the name of his company, and the revolutionary AI technology he claimed to be developing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like he didn't exist. I even tried searching for the restaurant owner he claimed to know and the NASA project he claimed to be working on. Again, nothing. It was all a lie. Every single word. I was both relieved and disturbed. Relieved that I had escaped a potentially dangerous situation, but disturbed by the fact that someone could be so completely disconnected from reality. It made me wonder what else was out there on those dating apps. How many other people were living in their own fabricated worlds, waiting to trap unsuspecting victims in their web of lies. The experience definitely changed my perspective on online dating. I became much more cautious and skeptical. I started doing more research on my matches before meeting them in person. I also learned to trust my gut. If something feels off, it probably is. I never saw Mark again, and I hope I never do. But I'll never forget the feeling of dread when I realized I was trapped on a date with someone who was living in an alternate reality. It was a reminder that not everyone is who they seem to be online, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most normal. Dating can be scary, even on something like a dating app. Sometimes people are just looking to be something they are not, to be dangerous and malicious. Dating apps can be just as scary as meeting someone in person, maybe even more so. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but the way he kept staring at the back of my neck during dinner should have been a signal, a flashing neon sign screaming danger, instead of just an awkward quirk. It was our third date, and up until that point, Mark had seemed normal. A little intense, maybe, but normal enough. We'd met online, naturally. It's how everyone meets these days, right? His profile was pretty standard. Hiking pictures, a smiling headshot, a bio that mentioned his love for dogs and craft beer. He seemed like a decent guy, someone I could see myself having a real relationship with. Our first 2 dates were fine. We went to a coffee shop, talked for hours, and discovered we had a lot in common. We both loved old movies, hated reality TV, and dreamed of traveling the world. The second date was a hike in the local state park. He was attentive, funny, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. There was a definite spark, a real connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. So, when he suggested dinner at that little Italian place downtown, I was excited. I dressed up, did my hair, and even put on a little extra makeup. I wanted to make a good impression. The restaurant was cozy and romantic, with dim lighting and candles on the tables. We ordered a bottle of wine, shared an appetizer, and the conversation flowed easily. He talked about his work as a software engineer, his family, his hopes for the future. I told him about my job as a teacher, my passion for reading, and my love for my cat Luna. Everything seemed perfect. Then, the staring started. It wasn't a quick glance or a fleeting look. It was a prolonged, intense gaze focused solely on the back of my neck. At first, I tried to ignore it, attributing it to nerves or maybe just a weird habit. But it kept happening, over and over again, throughout the entire meal. Every time I looked up, I'd catch him staring. When I turned my head to talk to the waiter, I could feel his eyes on me. It made me incredibly uncomfortable, like I was being watched, scrutinized. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked, trying to keep my voice light and casual. He blinked, as if snapping out of a trance. "Yeah, everything's great." "Why?" "You just seem distracted," I said, carefully choosing my words. "And you keep looking at the back of my neck." He chuckled nervously. "Oh, sorry. It's just you have a really beautiful neckline." I didn't buy it for a second. It felt like a lie, a clumsy attempt to explain away his strange behavior. But I didn't want to make a scene, so I let it go. We finished dinner, and he walked me back to my car. He leaned in for a kiss, and I hesitated for a moment before obliging. The kiss was awkward and forced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still staring at my neck. I drove home feeling uneasy, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about Mark felt off. I replayed the date in my head, searching for clues, trying to make sense of his behavior. The staring, the forced smile, the way he avoided eye contact when I confronted him. It all added up to something unsettling. I decided to do a little digging. I know, it's not the most mature thing to do, but I couldn't shake my gut feeling. I started with a simple Google search, typing in his name and the city we lived in. The results were pretty standard. His LinkedIn profile, a few mentions in local news articles related to his work. Nothing alarming. But then I stumbled upon a forum, a local community website, where people shared stories and opinions. And that's where I found it. A thread titled "Strange Encounters" with a guy named Mark. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on the link and started reading. The thread was filled with stories from women who had dated a man named Mark, all describing similar experiences. Intense staring, unsettling comments, a general feeling of being watched and controlled. One woman wrote about how he had memorized her daily routine and would show up unexpectedly at her favorite coffee shop or gym. Another woman described how he had hacked into her email account and was reading her messages. As I read through the thread, my blood ran cold. It was like reading a description of my own date, amplified and intensified. These women were describing the same man, the same creepy behavior, the same sense of unease. I felt sick to my stomach. I had been so close to falling for this guy, to letting him into my life. I could have become one of these women, another victim of his twisted obsession. I immediately blocked Mark's number and deleted him from all my social media accounts. I changed my passwords, updated my privacy settings, and installed a security system in my apartment. I was terrified, but I was also determined to protect myself. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened alert, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I told my friends and family what had happened, and they were incredibly supportive. They offered to stay with me, to walk me home, to do anything to make me feel safe. A week later, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully opened it. Inside, there was a single object, a photograph of me, taken without my knowledge while I was walking down the street. On the back of the photo, there was a handwritten note, "I'm always watching." That was it. I called the police. They took the threat seriously and opened an investigation. They interviewed Mark, searched his apartment, and collected evidence. It turned out that he had a history of stalking and harassment. He had been arrested several times before for similar offenses, but he had always managed to avoid serious consequences. This time, however, the evidence was overwhelming. The police were able to connect him to the package and the note, as well as to some of the other women who had posted on the forum. He was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. The trial was a long and difficult process. I had to testify, relive my experiences, and face Mark in court. It was terrifying, but I knew I had to do it. I had to stand up for myself and for all the other women who had been victimized by him. In the end, justice prevailed. Mark was found guilty and sentenced to several years in prison. He was also ordered to stay away from me and the other women he had harassed. It's been a few years since then, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath of what happened. I have trust issues, I'm hesitant to date, and I'm always a little bit paranoid. But I'm also stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I learned a valuable lesson about trusting my gut, about being cautious, and about standing up for myself. And I'll never, ever ignore that feeling again. The feeling when someone stares just a little too long. The feeling when something just doesn't feel right. The feeling that screams danger. No matter how small that feeling might be, it might just save your life. Okay, buckle up, because I'm about to tell you about the absolute worst dating experience of my life. And trust me, I've had some doozies. This wasn't just awkward or boring. It was genuinely terrifying. I met him on a dating app, the kind that prides itself on matching people based on shared interests and deep connections. His profile was filled with pictures of him hiking, reading, and volunteering at an animal shelter. He seemed like a sensitive, outdoorsy intellectual, basically, my ideal guy. We chatted for a couple of weeks, and the conversations were actually pretty great. He was witty, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our political views, and I felt like we were really connecting. So, when he suggested we meet up for a hike, I was excited. He suggested a trail a little outside of the city, one I hadn't been to before. He said it was beautiful and secluded, perfect for a first date, where we could really talk and enjoy nature. Red flag number 1, maybe? But I was so caught up in the idea of meeting this amazing guy that I ignored the little voice in the back of my head telling me it might not be the best idea to go on a secluded hike with a stranger. The day of the hike, I was a little nervous, but mostly excited. I packed a backpack with water, snacks, and sunscreen, and headed out to the trailhead. He was already there when I arrived, leaning against his car, looking exactly like his pictures. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He greeted me with a hug, and I instantly felt a little more at ease. The hike started out great. The trail was beautiful, winding through lush forests and offering stunning views of the surrounding mountains. We talked and laughed, and I felt like we were really hitting it off. He was even more charming in person than he had been online. But then, about an hour into the hike, things started to get weird. We had veered off the main trail onto a smaller, less maintained path. I hadn't really noticed at first, but the trees were getting denser, and the trail was becoming increasingly overgrown. I asked him where we were going, and he just smiled and said he wanted to show me something special. I started to feel a little uneasy. The trail was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate, and I was starting to feel like we were completely lost. I asked him again where we were going, and he just kept smiling and saying, "Almost there." After another half hour of struggling through the dense undergrowth, we finally arrived at a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old, abandoned cabin. It was dilapidated and overgrown with vines, and it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I stopped. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He just smiled and said, "I told you I wanted to show you something special." He started walking towards the cabin, and I hesitated for a moment before following him. The cabin was even creepier up close. The windows were boarded up, the door was hanging off its hinges, and the whole place seemed to be rotting from the inside out. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, disappearing into the darkness. "Come on," he said, his voice echoing from within the cabin. I stood there for a moment, frozen with fear. Every instinct in my body was telling me to run, but I was also afraid of being alone in the middle of the woods. Finally, I took a deep breath and stepped inside the cabin. The inside was even worse than I had imagined. It was dark, damp, and smelled like mildew and decay. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung from every corner. I could barely see anything, but I could feel his presence in the room with me. "What is this place?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, I heard a click, and suddenly the room was plunged into complete darkness. I gasped and stumbled backward, my hands outstretched, trying to find something to hold onto. I could hear him moving around in the darkness, but I couldn't see him. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. He still didn't answer. Then I heard another click, and a small, flickering light appeared in the room. He had lit a candle, and the dim light cast eerie shadows on the walls. I could see him now, standing in the corner of the room, holding the candle in his hand. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the sinister smile on his lips. "Welcome to my special place," he said, his voice low and menacing. I stared at him in horror, realizing that I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't the sensitive, outdoorsy intellectual I had thought he was. This was someone else entirely, someone dark and dangerous. I want to leave, I said, my voice trembling. He just chuckled. Oh, but we've only just begun, he said, taking a step closer to me. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know how. He kept moving closer, his eyes fixed on me, his smile widening. I could see something glinting in his hand, something small and metallic. A knife. Please, I begged. Don't do this. He didn't say anything. He just kept coming closer, the knife glinting in the candlelight. I knew I had to fight back. I took a deep breath and lunged at him, knocking the candle out of his hand. The room was plunged into darkness again, but I could still feel his presence, his hand reaching for me. I screamed and kicked, trying to get away from him. I managed to land a few blows, but he was stronger than me. He grabbed my arm and pulled me towards him, the knife pressing against my throat. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst. But then, suddenly, I heard a loud noise outside the cabin. A dog barking. He froze for a moment, his grip on me loosening slightly. I seized the opportunity and kicked him in the groin. He gasped and stumbled backward, releasing me. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, stumbling through the darkness, desperate to get away from him. I could hear him behind me, cursing and yelling, but I didn't stop running. I ran as fast as I could, blindly, through the woods, not knowing where I was going, just knowing that I had to get away from him. After what felt like an eternity, I finally stumbled back onto the main trail. I kept running until I reached the trailhead, where I collapsed, gasping for breath. A couple walking their dog found me and helped me get back to my car. I drove straight to the police station and told them everything that had happened. They took my statement and launched an investigation. They found the cabin, but he was gone. They never caught him. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget the terror I felt in that cabin. I still have nightmares about it. I'm much more cautious about dating now. I always meet people in public places, and I always tell someone where I'm going and who I'm meeting. I'll never go on a secluded hike with a stranger again. It was the most terrifying experience of my life, and it taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of online dating. I got incredibly lucky, and I feel that there are some people that you'll never know what their intentions are. People love to say, trust your gut. However, trusting your gut doesn't always work, especially with online dating. Online dating can be dangerous. I thought it was for a laugh. I thought it was for fun. I am never going to think that again. Okay, so, I guess I'm finally ready to tell this story. It's not something I talk about ever. Partly because it's just embarrassing. Partly because it still freaks me out a little, even after all this time. And honestly, writing it down now feels like I'm opening a door I slammed shut a long time ago. But here goes. This happened a few years ago when I was in that awkward phase of my late 20s, where all my friends are getting married, and I was still figuring out if I could keep a houseplant alive. Pressure was on, you know. So, naturally, I did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I downloaded every dating app under the sun. Bumble, Hinge, Tinder, the whole shebang. I went on a bunch of dates, most of them forgettable. A few decent ones that fizzled out. The usual dating app roller coaster. Then I matched with Liam. Liam was different. He wasn't conventionally attractive, but he had this intense energy in his pictures, like he was always on the verge of saying something profound. He had a slightly crooked smile and these piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. His bio was short and intriguing. Writer. Seeker. Lost, but trying to find my way. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He wasn't into the typical small talk. He wanted to talk about big ideas, about philosophy, about the meaning of life. Which, okay, sound a little pretentious now, but at the time, I was totally hooked. I'd been so used to guys just wanting to talk about sports or their jobs that Liam's intellectual curiosity felt like a breath of fresh air. We talked for hours every night, and I found myself looking forward to his messages more than anything. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just physically, but on a deeper level. We finally decided to meet up. He suggested this little coffee shop tucked away in a quiet part of town, the kind of place that's always playing jazz music and smells like old books. It was perfect. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He was sitting in a corner booth, reading a book, just like I imagined he would be. He looked up when I approached, and that crooked smile spread across his face. "You made it," he said, his voice a little deeper than I expected. The date started off great. The conversation was even better in person than it was online. We talked about everything, our families, our dreams, our fears. He was incredibly attentive, listening intently to everything I said, asking thoughtful questions. I felt like he really saw me, like he understood me in a way that no one else ever had. After a couple of hours, he suggested we go for a walk in the park nearby. It was a beautiful evening. The sun was setting, and the air was crisp. We walked along a winding path, hand in hand, talking and laughing. It felt like something out of a movie. Then, things started to get weird. We stopped near a large oak tree, and Liam turned to me, his eyes suddenly serious. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "Something important." I braced myself, thinking he was about to confess some dark secret from his past. But what he said next was far stranger than anything I could have imagined. "I'm not who you think I am," he said. "I'm different." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "What do you mean?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "I'm not from here," he said. "Not from this time." I stared at him, my mind racing. Was this some kind of elaborate role-playing game? Was he messing with me? "I don't understand," I said. "I'm from the future," he said, his voice unwavering. "I came back to find you." I burst out laughing. "Okay, you're really good," I said. "But seriously, what's going on?" He didn't laugh. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I'm not joking," he said. "I know this sounds crazy, but it's the truth. I've been waiting for you for a long time." He went on to tell me this elaborate story about how time travel was possible in the future, and how he had used it to come back to our time to find his soulmate, who, according to his research, was me. He said that in the future, our connection was legendary, that we were destined to do great things together. It was completely insane. I wanted to run, but I was also morbidly curious. Part of me wondered if he was just delusional, if he genuinely believed what he was saying. I decided to play along, just to see how far he would take it. "Okay, Liam," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that what you're saying is true. Why me? Why come all the way back here for me?" He smiled a slow, knowing smile. "Because you're special," he said. "You have a power inside you that you don't even know about, a power that will change the world." He reached out and took my hand, his touch sending a strange shiver down my spine. "I can help you unlock that power," he said, "but you have to trust me." That was when I knew I had to get out of there. This wasn't just some harmless quirk. This was something seriously wrong. I need to go," I said, pulling my hand away. "I have an early day tomorrow." He looked disappointed, but he didn't try to stop me. "I understand," he said, "but I'll be seeing you again." I practically ran back to my car, fumbling with my keys, desperate to get away. I drove home as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got to my apartment, I locked all the doors and windows and barricaded myself in my bedroom. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I blocked Liam on all my social media accounts and changed my phone number. I told my friends what had happened, and they all agreed that he was a major creep. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, to chalk it up to a bizarre dating app experience. But Liam wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, I started noticing things. Small things at first, like my mail being rearranged or a light being left on when I knew I had turned it off. I dismissed them as my imagination, as stress-induced paranoia. But then the things got weirder. I started finding notes on my car, cryptic messages written in a strange handwriting. "The future is waiting. Don't be afraid. I know what you're capable of." I was terrified. I knew it was Liam. He was stalking me. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything without more evidence. They told me to keep a record of everything and to call them if I felt like I was in danger. I installed security cameras in my apartment and started carrying pepper spray everywhere I went. I was living in a constant state of fear. Then, one night, I came home to find my apartment ransacked. Everything was thrown everywhere, furniture was overturned, and my belongings were scattered across the floor. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like blood, was a single word: soon. I called the police immediately, and they came and took a report. They said it looked like a robbery, but nothing was missing. It was clear to me that Liam had done it. He was escalating. I knew I had to do something drastic. I decided to move. I packed up everything I owned and moved to a different city, a few states away. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I wanted to disappear completely. I started a new life in my new city, got a new job, made new friends. For a while, I felt safe. I thought I had finally escaped Liam. But then, about a year later, I saw him. I was walking down the street one day when I saw him across the road. He was standing there, watching me, that crooked smile on his face. I froze, my blood running cold. He raised his hand in a small wave, then turned and walked away. I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still out there, somewhere, waiting. And that's why I've never told this story before, because I'm afraid that if I talk about it, he'll find me again. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching me, that he's still waiting for me to unlock my power. And honestly, I'd rather just live a normal, boring life than deal with whatever twisted version of the future he has planned for me. So yeah, that's my dating app horror story. It's not a ghost story or a monster story. It's just a story about a guy who thought he was from the future and who scared the hell out of me. And it's a story I'll probably never tell anyone again. I think this is what scares me, that there's no closure and that he is still out there somewhere. I used to scoff at those dating horror story threads online. All the exaggerated tales of catfishing, stalkers, and dates gone disastrously wrong just seemed like creative writing exercises to me. Like, sure, bad dates happen. Awkward conversations, mismatched expectations, maybe a slightly creepy vibe here and there. But the truly insane stuff? I figured it was just internet fiction, designed to rack up clicks and shares. I used to think these stories were made up, until it happened to me. It started, innocently enough, on Bumble. I'd been single for a while, not actively looking, but open to the possibility of meeting someone interesting. His profile was intriguing. Liam, mid-30s, worked as a software engineer, liked hiking and obscure indie films. His pictures were decent, nothing model-esque, but he looked normal, approachable. We matched, exchanged a few messages, and the conversation flowed easily. He was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked for about a week before agreeing to meet for drinks. I suggested a cozy little wine bar near my apartment, a safe, public place. He readily agreed. The day of the date, I felt that familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. I spent way too long deciding what to wear, finally settling on a simple black dress and boots. I met my friend Sarah before to calm my nerves. "Don't get murdered," she said, "and text me if he tries to show you his rock collection or something equally weird." It felt reassuring that someone knew where I was and was checking on me. Liam was already at the bar when I arrived. He stood up to greet me, and my first impression was, oh, hey. He was a bit shorter than I'd expected, and his hair was a little messier than it appeared in his photos, but he had kind eyes and a warm smile. We ordered drinks and started chatting. The first hour was actually pretty great. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our favorite travel destinations. He was a good conversationalist, attentive and engaging. He even laughed at my terrible jokes. I started to think, okay, maybe this could actually go somewhere. But then, things started to get off. It began subtly. He started asking me increasingly personal questions. Not just the standard, what do you do for a living? Kind of questions, but deeper, more probing inquiries about my past relationships, my family dynamics, my insecurities. At first, I chalked it up to him being genuinely interested in getting to know me on a deeper level. But the questions kept coming, each one more intrusive than the last. He asked about my childhood, specifically about my relationship with my father, who passed away when I was young. It felt odd, as if he were trying to dig up something painful. I tried to deflect, saying it was a long story, but he pressed me. "I'm interested," he said, his eyes a little too intense. "Tell me about it." I begrudgingly shared a few details, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Then, he started talking about his own past. He mentioned a previous relationship that had ended badly, hinting at some kind of betrayal or trauma. He didn't go into specifics, but the way he spoke about it made me uneasy. There was a darkness in his eyes, a simmering anger that I couldn't quite place. As the evening wore on, his behavior became more erratic. He started drinking heavily, downing glass after glass of wine. His speech became slurred, and his eyes grew distant. He began rambling about conspiracy theories, government surveillance, and the truth, that was being hidden from us. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he wouldn't let it go. He insisted on sharing his worldview, growing increasingly agitated as I politely disagreed with his more outlandish claims. It was at this point that I started to feel genuinely scared. This wasn't just a bad date. This was something else entirely. I made a mental note to text Sarah as soon as possible. He reached across the table and grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You're different," he said, his voice low and raspy. "You're one of the few who can see through the lies." I tried to pull my hand away, but he held on tight. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You know," he said, leaning closer, his breath smelling of wine and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. "You feel it too, don't you? The feeling that something's not right." I shook my head, trying to disengage. "I think I should go," I said, standing up. He stood up too, blocking my path. "No, please," he said, his eyes pleading. "Don't leave. I need you to understand." I could see now the truth. I finally saw the shift when he tried to grab my arm. I didn't think he was a threat until he put his hands on me, as I was trying to leave. I had to pull myself away, and he got more angry. I made a run for it, weaving through the crowded bar, desperate to get away from him. He followed me, stumbling slightly, yelling something about fate and destiny. I didn't look back. I burst out of the bar and into the cold night air, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly that I could barely unlock it. I quickly texted Sarah. "Help. Bad date. On street name near bar name." I started walking quickly, trying to put as much distance between myself and the bar as possible. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps growing closer. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him running towards me, his face contorted with rage. I panicked. I didn't know what he was capable of, but I wasn't willing to find out. I sprinted down the street, my boots clicking on the pavement. I could hear him gaining on me. I reached a busy intersection and darted across the street, narrowly avoiding a speeding car. I looked back and saw him standing on the sidewalk, staring at me, his eyes filled with a chilling intensity. He didn't follow me across the street. He just stood there, watching. I kept running until I reached my apartment building. I buzzed myself in and practically collapsed inside, my legs shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, my body trembling. A moment later, Sarah came racing in, her face etched with concern. "What happened?" she asked, grabbing my arms. I burst into tears, recounting the horrifying events of the past few hours. Sarah stayed with me that night, and I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every passing car sent shivers down my spine. I was convinced that Liam was lurking outside, waiting for me. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report. I showed them his Bumble profile and described everything that had happened. They took my statement seriously, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any evidence of a crime. For weeks, I lived in fear. I jumped at every unexpected sound. I avoided walking alone at night, and I constantly checked my locks. I deleted my Bumble profile and vowed to never online date again. I couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was still out there, watching me. Then one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated to open it, fearing the worst. Finally, I mustered the courage to tear it open. Inside, there was a single item, a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through my apartment window. I was sitting on my couch, reading a book, completely unaware that I was being watched. On the back of the photo, there was a handwritten message. "I told you, we were meant to be." I screamed. I immediately called the police, my voice shaking with terror. They came to my apartment and took the photo as evidence. They stepped up patrols in my neighborhood and advised me to take extra precautions. I moved out of my apartment a few days later. I couldn't bear the thought of living there anymore, knowing that Liam had been watching me. I moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and cut off contact with everyone except for a few close friends. It's been several years since that nightmarish date, and I still think about Liam sometimes. I don't know if he's still out there, or if he's moved on to someone else, but I'll never forget the fear, the feeling of being hunted, the realization that the internet isn't always a safe place. I used to think those dating horror stories were made up. Now I know they're not. They're real, and they can happen to anyone. I got lucky. I survived. but the experience changed me forever. I'm more cautious now, more guarded, more aware of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly normal people. And I'll never, ever go on another online date. I'd been seeing Mark for about 6 weeks, which in my book constitutes officially dating. Not Facebook official, because who even does that anymore? But definitely beyond the casual hookup phase. We'd met at a concert, bonded over our shared love of obscure indie bands and overpriced beer. He was cute, funny, and surprisingly insightful. He worked as a librarian, which I found incredibly endearing, and always smelled faintly of old books and coffee, a combination I found surprisingly attractive. Our dates were pretty standard: movies, restaurants, walks in the park. We had great conversations, laughed a lot, and the physical chemistry was definitely there. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking about my work, my family, my dreams. I found myself actually liking him, which was a rare occurrence for me. I tend to be pretty guarded, but Mark had a way of making me feel comfortable and safe. Or so I thought. It was a Friday night, and we were at my apartment, making dinner. I was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, and Mark was in charge of the rice. We had music playing softly in the background, and the atmosphere was relaxed and cozy. We'd both had a long week, and we were looking forward to a quiet night in. We were talking about our favorite books when Mark suddenly stopped stirring the rice. He turned to me, a strange look in his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking a lot about you lately." "Okay," I replied, a little uncertain. "And I've realized that I really like you, Sarah. Really like you." "I like you too, Mark," I said, smiling. "That's why we're here, making dinner together." He didn't smile back. "No, you don't understand. I need you, Sarah. You're perfect. You're everything I've ever wanted." His words were flattering, but something about his tone made me uneasy. "Mark, you're being a little intense," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "We've only been dating for a month and a half." He stepped closer to me, his eyes fixed on mine. "I know we haven't known each other for long, but I feel like I've known you my whole life. It's like we were meant to be together." I took a step back, suddenly feeling trapped in my own kitchen. "Mark, you're scaring me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly tight. "Don't be scared, Sarah. I would never hurt you. I just want to be with you. Always." I tried to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let go. "Mark, let go of me," I said, my voice firmer this time. His grip tightened even more. "I can't, Sarah. I can't lose you. You're mine." That's when I never felt unsafe until that moment. The look in his eyes wasn't love or affection. It was something darker, something possessive and obsessive. He wasn't seeing me as a person, but as an object, something he owned. "Mark, you're hurting me," I said, my voice rising in panic. He didn't seem to hear me. He just kept staring at me, his eyes burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "We'll be together forever, Sarah," he whispered. "Just you and me." I knew I had to get away from him. I had to break free. I took a deep breath and focused all my energy on pulling my hand away. Finally, with a sharp tug, I managed to wrench my hand from his grasp. I stumbled back, putting as much distance between us as possible. "Get out, Mark," I said, my voice shaking. "Get out of my apartment." He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with those terrifying eyes. "You don't mean that, Sarah," he said softly. "You want me here. You need me." "No, I don't," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I want you to leave. Now." He finally seemed to realize that I was serious. His expression changed from possessive to hurt and confused. "But I thought we had something special," he said, his voice cracking. "We did," I said. "But you ruined it. Now get out." He hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked towards the door. He didn't say another word. He just left, leaving me standing alone in my kitchen, trembling with fear. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Mark, the sweet, funny librarian, had turned into a possessive, obsessive stranger in a matter of minutes. I spent the rest of the night in a state of shock. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even think straight. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to understand what had gone wrong. How could I have been so wrong about him? How could I have missed the warning signs? The next morning, I called my best friend, Emily, and told her everything. She was horrified. "That's insane, Sarah," she said. "You need to report him to the police." I hesitated. I didn't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to forget the whole thing and move on. But Emily was right. What if he did this to someone else? What if he came back? I went to the police station and filed a report. I told them everything that had happened, including the possessive comments, the tight grip, and the look in his eyes. They took my statement seriously and promised to investigate. They contacted Mark and questioned him. He denied everything, claiming that I had misinterpreted his words and actions. He said he was just trying to express his feelings for me, but I had overreacted. The police couldn't prove anything, so they couldn't arrest him, but they did issue him a warning, telling him to stay away from me. I was relieved that the police had taken my concern seriously, but I was still terrified. I knew that a piece of paper wouldn't necessarily stop Mark from doing something stupid. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and bought a can of pepper spray. I also started taking self-defense classes. I was determined to protect myself, no matter what. I also cut off all contact with Mark. I blocked his number, deleted him from social media, and avoided any places where I knew he might be. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary. For months, I lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every time I heard a noise outside my apartment, I would jump. Every time I saw a man who looked vaguely like Mark, my heart would race. I was constantly on edge, waiting for something bad to happen. Eventually, though, the fear started to fade. The nightmares became less frequent. The anxiety lessened. I started to feel safe again. It's been 2 years since that night, and I haven't seen or heard from Mark since. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, and I try not to think about him. I've moved on with my life, but the experience changed me. It made me more cautious, more aware of the potential dangers that lurk beneath the surface. I'm still open to dating, but I'm much more careful about who I let into my life. I trust my instincts more, and I'm not afraid to walk away from a situation that feels wrong. I learned a valuable lesson that night, that even the people who seem the most harmless can be capable of darkness, and that sometimes the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. Dating apps can be a landmine for unsafe experiences. I take extra steps and make sure to trust myself more. I never felt unsafe until that moment.